Thank you, everybody, for being here. I do need my cheat sheet in front of me. Again, it's really exciting to be here today to provide you with a preview of this very insightful new exhibit, and it is entitled The Birmingham Scene, Seldom Seen Artwork from the 30s and the 40s. And while this particular presentation, as Julius noted, it is entitled Industrial Voices, Reflections on the Birmingham Scene During the Great Depression, I'm also looking a little outside the industrial landscape. And although I am not an art historian, I'm a curator of an industrial museum, and I'm a 20th century historian. When I looked at these pieces, when Marjorie asked me to do this, I was really flattered because I'm a big fan of everything that she's done in the past. But I thought, oh, you know, but when I started to look at these pieces, I really got it. I really understood why these particular artists have chosen these particular subjects during this particular period of time. And in a sense, are they not historians? Of course they are. They are bringing history to life. They're capturing a moment. They're making this period accessible and more understandable. That's just my personal opinion. And they are achieving all of this, and they are capturing all of this, and this is reflected in this one slide that I have up here. Okay, so they're achieving this, they're capturing all of this through their choice of colors, through their techniques, the subject matter. The subject matter is going to speak to the grittiness, it's going to speak to the beauty, the desolation, the community, the culture that was the 1930s and the 1940s in both the urban and rural setting. Again, it is reflected in this slide. Now, before I introduce you to some of the artists, I do want to give you a little history lesson, because that is what I like to do most, is lecture, and I even have some students here today, so I know that must be for extra credit though, so no, but in August of 1928, but not long before his election to the presidency, Herbert Hoover proclaimed the following: "We in America today are nearer to the final triumph over poverty than ever before in the history of any land. The poorhouse is vanishing from among us." And of course, only 15 months later, these words are going to come back and haunt President Hoover, because the country is going to experience the severest and the most prolonged depression, the most prolonged economic depression in its history. This is a depression that would not go away, and this is a depression that continued in one form or another for a full decade. And it was a very traumatic experience for Americans, because people not only lost their jobs, but they lost their land, they lost their property. Many thousands of people were homeless, and they faced starvation. And this depression, it reached into every area of economic life. And because of this, it reached into, and you all are very familiar with these pictures, it really reached into our social life as well. As we well know, it destroyed the stock market, it destroyed all types of industry, all types of businesses. It almost destroyed the national banking system, but most of all, and this is especially in the South, it created massive unemployment. The unemployment rate was as high as 25%, and it never fell much below 15% at any period of time between 1930 and 1940. Well, until World War II. What gets us out of the Great Depression? World War II. And this massive and this persistent unemployment, this was the most visible, and to many, this was the most frightening aspect of the Great Depression, because American families, they're no longer able to live this type of lifestyle that they were used to living in the 20s. And what you see here, it's what historians called a retreat from consumerism. In other words, women returned to sewing clothes for their families. They took in laundry, they canned food, they took in boarders. Parents moved in with kids, kids moved in with parents. The marriage rate dropped, the birth rate dropped, the divorce rate dropped. I mean, times were tough, but surprisingly, our traditional values were still intact, and it's reflected in these pieces. Most Americans held on to the belief in the American way of life. And this is a phrase that's going to be repeated throughout this entire period. Okay, so when the presidential election rolls around in 1932, Herbert Hoover was out, befuddled, confused, but he's out. And in you have the very charismatic Democratic governor of New York in the likes of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And this is the cover of the New Yorker in 1933. It speaks volumes. You've got the very jubilant Roosevelt and the rather solemn Herbert Hoover. And this was a well-loved man. Did he get us out of the Great Depression? No, but morally he really helped us. Growing up in my family, you know, an Italian Catholic family, there was always a picture of Franklin Roosevelt and, of course, you know, the Pope. Now, and in his inaugural address, of course, what did Roosevelt tell the American people? The only thing that we have to fear is fear itself. But he also stated, and this is what he said in his acceptance speech, and he said the following: I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people, giving, of course, his new program a name that we're very familiar with today and a name that's going to be around for a very long period of time, and that's the New Deal program. Does this program end the Great Depression? No, it does not, but it puts people to work, it gives them hope, it gives them respectability. I'm sure everybody in your family, somebody worked in a New Deal program. Well, mine did. I know for a fact they did in around Missouri and Chicago. But two regions of the country that are going to receive special attention from the New Deal are going to be the American West and the American South. New Deal programs that were particularly helpful to Alabama included relief projects like the Civil Works Administration. This is the CWA. This employed 129,000 Alabamians. And of course the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. It employed nearly 67,000 young Alabama men in forestry, recreational work. But in the long run, the most important New Deal program for Alabama, parts of Tennessee, we all know this. It's going to be the creation of the Tennessee Valley Authority, the TVA. TVA literally, you know, we take for granted electricity so much. It literally electrified the northern third of the state. And this federal program, it not only brought lights and power to farms, but it also, again, it created cheap electricity, and it built dams on rivers that ended huge, enormous flooding problems. And it created major recreational areas. But the largest infrastructure in the South is going to be the TVA. Now, these New Deal programs are also going to do something else. They're going to expose for the very first time the economic conditions in the American South. As Julia said, in 1938, there was a report that was sponsored by the federal government, and a group of social scientists called the South the nation's #1 economic problem. Now, a lot of Southerners objected to this report because it said, hey, there you go again. You know, they claimed that it was reinforcing anti-Southern prejudice outside the region. But others saw it as, this is an opportunity to win national support for efforts to finally modernize and develop the region. And it's going to happen. You're going to have TVA. You're going to have the Rural Electrification Program. Okay, Birmingham. These are both from Birmingham. Birmingham experienced crippling economic problems during the Great Depression. Yes, there is industry, but industry is hit hard. All the sources of capital that were fueling the city's growth completely dry up. But what's the problem here? All this dries up at the same time that these farm laborers, driven off the land, were coming into the city in search of work. So although programs like the CCC were helpful, more needed to be done. And so the program that is going to put millions of people back to work, this is going to be the Works Progress Administration. And this is actually part of the second New Deal program that comes out in 1935. And we're familiar, these are some posters. And this program was responsible for building or renovating 110,000 public buildings, including schools and libraries. It built airports. It built 500,000 miles of new road and over 100,000 bridges, which need what? Which need iron, which need steel. That is being produced once again in Birmingham. And in the process, what's more important, it kept an average of 2.1 million workers employed, and they spent money to help jumpstart the economy. WPA projects in the Birmingham area, I think everybody's pretty familiar with a lot of them. Oak Mountain State Park, Cheehaw, thousands of schools. Again, all kinds of projects for both blacks and whites. Now, the WPA also did something else. It also gave assistance to these occupations that really did not fit into any traditional category of relief. And what I'm talking about is the Federal Writers Project. The Federal Writers Project of the WPA, it gave unemployed writers the chance to produce, to write, and receive a government salary. A lot of guidebooks were put out during this time. The Mississippi, A Guide to the Magnolia State. This came out during this particular period of time. The Federal Music Project and the Federal Theater Project oversaw the production of concerts and plays. It created work for unemployed musicians and actors and directors. This is an African-American production of Macbeth in Harlem. And these types of productions were happening in Birmingham's African-American community as well. Okay, now what we really want to talk about, the Federal Arts Project. Now this program helped painters and sculptors, photographers, all types of artists continue their careers, including a great many in the American South and in Birmingham. Of course, this is Dorothea Lange. Dorothea Lange was known for documenting through her photography the plight of those affected by the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, especially in the West. You know, the woman on my right, you know, she was a pea picker. She was on the side of the road in California, and Dorothea Lange, you know, took her picture. Obviously a very proud woman. And the picture on the left, of course, sharecroppers in the American South. And did this open up the eyes, you know, of a lot of Americans? You know, of course it did. Artists, though, artists trained in the North, primarily New York, they're going to come to the American South. They're going to come to cities like New Orleans and Birmingham. And some of them were returning home. And when they got to Birmingham, they took their sketch pads and they took their paintings and their paints, they took their cameras, and they went into the Birmingham community. And what they did, they captured in real time, for lack of a better word, they captured what was happening around them. The segregated living conditions, the industry, the very unique communities, and what came out of these wanderings, if you will, were some amazing watercolors and pastels and woodblock prints and charcoals and pencil sketches that you're all going to be able to see today. But when I looked at these aren't just artists. These are historians, and they're documenting everyday life and work. Now, nearly all the artists in this exhibit, they received federal support at some time during the Great Depression. Most taught in their homes, they taught in studios, they taught in local schools. They taught because they wanted to share their passion for art and the impact that art could make on Southern society. Now, most artists in this show participated in the Southern Printmaker Society, the Dixie Art Colony, but these venues also provided exhibition opportunities. And what was important about this? It linked these artists to buyers and recognition outside of the South. Now, in the 1930s and 40s, it's going to be very difficult to host an exhibit in Birmingham, Alabama. You don't have the Birmingham Museum of Art. So exhibits were held, as this one is today, in most public libraries, again, including the one you're standing in, or sitting in. Which brings us to our first artist, Frank Hartley Anderson. From 1935 to 1940, Anderson ran the Southern Printmaker Society, and he began making wood block prints in the early 1930s. And in 1934, he was accepted into the very first New Deal art project, and it was called, I'd never heard of it until I started doing research for this, the Public Works of Art Project. And this program offered selected artists a wage to produce a certain kind of a certain amount of art. And at the end of the program, these artists had to host an exhibit in a public place. So Anderson produced over 20 of these block prints, and they were all of American historical scenes. And the first ones he did were for the Birmingham Public School, and this is where his wife, Martha, taught. She taught art teachers, and she taught them under another federally funded program. Now, Martha was an accomplished artist. She was a teacher in her own right, and she often designed the work and sketched the figures, while Anderson actually cut the wood blocks and prepared the print. Now, the most famous is probably Church Supper. It received numerous awards. It was later shown at the Whitney Museum of Art in New York. And Emma, the Anderson's family cook, she posed for Martha. And it's really reflected in all three of these women. And again, Anderson created numerous African American prints. And these prints reveal in great detail what was most sacred to the African American community. And that's church, and that's their religion. It was a source of comfort and strength during slavery, and it's going to do the same thing during the hard times of the Great Depression. Black churches during this particular period of time, it allowed African Americans, especially men, to hold positions of authority, which this is something they could not do in segregated society. They could become deacons. And at churches where you discuss politics, and you discuss family issues, and you discuss community issues, and you discuss sports. And going back to this one, yeah, the women are serving the men, not surprising, but everyone is in conversation. Everyone feels comfortable speaking up. So in 1935, Anderson is going to organize a public exhibition at the Birmingham Public Library. And this would later become a touring exhibition. It's going to go around the country, and it's going to feature over 200 selected works. And the subject matter included everything from ordinary people to industry to rural and street scenes, again, including African American communities. The themes were very important to the black community: preaching, baptism, and of course you also have themes that are quite different, as you can see here in South Winter and Young Musicians. My favorite, I'm going to skip ahead, is this one. This is called The End of the Day. Okay, industry is being revitalized by New Deal money, but at the end of the day, it's still back-breaking work. And it's hard to see, but you see the figures at the very bottom on my right? They're just kind of laying back, you know, at the end of the day. But going back to this one, what I noticed, whether white or black, whatever the subject, Anderson is obviously very respectful of his subject matter. And again, this is very obvious by the way they're portrayed. They're very proud. I don't care which one of these you're looking at. They're very proud, almost elegant. Now, Anderson was also commissioned, as were all of these artists. Just to do a PowerPoint presentation on the murals would be amazing. But he was also commissioned to paint some of the many murals depicting Birmingham industry as well. And one thing you need to remember about these New Deal art projects, they not only provided jobs for these artists that were out of work, but they really had a larger mission, and Roosevelt knew this, and that was to promote American art and culture and to give Americans access to what President Roosevelt described as an abundant life. Now, it's not abundant in the economic sense, but it's abundant how? We're going back to our roots in the Great Depression, okay? We're not so consumer driven. So it's abundant in the cultural sense. Now, the next selection is just somebody I fell in love with. And this is this very small, spunky, amazing woman, and her name is Martha Henderson Goings. And Miss Goings left the South in the 1920s. Okay, this is 1920s. And she went to New York. She attended the New York School of Fine and Applied Arts, and she came back to Birmingham. And when she came back to Birmingham, she established a studio behind her parents' house on Cliff Road. I love this studio. It's bigger than my house. And she taught painting, she taught watercolors, she taught to children, she taught to adults. And she married in 1936, and she married Hubert Goings, and she continued to paint, and she continued to exhibit her watercolors throughout the city. Now, what I find amazing about Goings is that, according to her family and what I had discussed with Marjorie, she would just at 1930, she'd grab her sketch pad, she'd wander the streets of Birmingham, and she would go anywhere that would bring an interesting subject matter. And she often painted in African American neighborhoods. What was important to African Americans, grocery stores, you had gas stations, and you notice in all these pictures there's always people. There's always people gathering. Again, areas that were important to the neighborhood. And of course she painted, again, this is Alabama snow, and you know, wandering, imagining that it does not snow very much in Alabama. It's funny how many of these I came across where they went out and painted while it was snowing. But again, there's always children. It's hard to see them, but they're in the background. And of course, times are rough. The fence is dilapidated. But there is such a respect to these small, tiny houses. And the cemetery, I'll come back to the cemetery. Okay, she also painted industry, lots of industry. You have company housing. This is Sloss company housing in the shadow of these billowing blast furnaces. Okay, again, you see the fence in disrepair, but you see the house, and right next door, you have to remember, it was okay to have a barn with chickens and cows and pigs. Okay, that was part of their livelihood. And she captures all of this. Now, again, industry. I put her portrait next to this because here's this demure, elegant woman who, look at her face, so, you know, determined, next to this, you know, gritty industrial scene. But her use of color just gives it such a special softness. But again, she also painted rural. Again, this is Jones Valley. Let me go through. I've downloaded all these. I just loved it. Even her smog coming out of the blast furnaces has an elegance to it. This is Sloss furnaces with these warehouses. This is where my office is today. The one, no, not really, but that's what we're assuming they are outside. But she also painted rural scenes, and you have to remember you really did not have to travel too far outside the skirts of Birmingham to find a rural community. And she probably, and so she paints these rural scenes with great respect. Even the sharecropper's shack, again, you know, you could walk and find these. And there's an elegance. Is it dilapidated? Are there problems? Yes, but you have the laundry, you know, outside. There's a sense of comfort in this particular scene. As is this one. Is this a plantation owner's house and a sharecropper's shack? Or is this a large house and just maybe just an outbuilding? Of course, you had I thought it was a telephone pole, but that is obviously gourds, birdhouses, correct? But again, she probably acquired this wanderlust. I'm going to go back to what she was doing in New York while she was studying with artists. And these artists in New York were very familiar with the Ashcan School. And these are painters who had taken to the streets to record working class neighborhoods in New York. And while the Ashcan style was really rather gritty and it was very sober, but Goings, her style is not. She brings beauty and awareness, if you will, to her industrial and rural scenes, along with the harsh reality of life in the Great Depression. Very quickly, what I want to go back and show you, what do you notice about all these scenes when I was looking at, especially these? She never fails. I think if I was going out to paint today, I would not put power lines. Is this progress? There's power lines everywhere. You see where the tree has fallen into the power line, but yet look at the cemetery, I guess in case they need to get in touch with somebody. But power lines everywhere, except, see the power line in the very far back? Except in here, in the rural. Has it reached the rural area yet? Perhaps not, but anyway, I'm going to move on. But again, fascinating. You're going to be amazed by her paintings. Okay, next we have this. Again, I apologize. It's rather hard to see. It's a picture of a picture of a picture. We have the modernist Roderick McKenzie. A lot of you are familiar with his work. McKenzie spent most of his life in Mobile, but he trained at some of the finest schools in the United States and France. He spent time in India, and then after India, he goes back to Mobile because he's appointed during the Great Depression to the Art Commission of the state of Alabama. Actually, he was appointed before, during the 1920s. But this is when McKenzie starts to envision what's going to become his signature project for years and years and years. In fact, this is going to occupy his life for probably the next 20 years, and that is industrial pastels. And he's going to produce 43 of the Alabama steel industry. And these are created on site, mainly at night, at places like Tennessee Coal and Iron Company. And he captures all of this harshness, but he's doing it with pastels. So there's such a softness to such a harsh world. And these pieces today, they're presently in the Birmingham Museum of Art, they're in Mobile, and there's one in my office. But again, such a softness to a harsh world. And he also, and I don't have the picture, but again, he participated in, he developed several murals around town as well. Now the next artist is Ernest Henderson. And Ernest Henderson, this is actually a little later. I'm moving into the 40s now. He was an artist that was known for his industrial scenes, and I'm talking giant, like the size of this one wall where the clock is. And again, he's known for his industrial scenes. He graduated from the Academy of Fine Arts in Chicago, and he comes back to Birmingham in 1928, and he opens up the Southern School of Art. And at the end of World War II, he is going to be commissioned. This is Tennessee Coal and Iron. The detail's amazing. He's commissioned by the Downtown Club, whose members are what? They're primarily wealthy industrialists, and he is told to create these very large metal etchings celebrating Birmingham industry, as if to say what? This is the 1940s. We're back in business, and these are huge, and we want everyone to know about it. Now, what Henderson would do, he would etch his designs directly into the metal, and then he would apply lacquer to achieve, this one is not here, this one is huge, but he would apply lacquer to achieve this very striking, almost translucent appearance. Now, in addition to the Downtown Club, he also produced a number of other paintings, again, all focusing on Birmingham industry. Now, all of these, in 1965, the Downtown Club put these paintings in storage. And in 1985, the very first director of Sloss Furnaces acquired these works for the Sloss collection. And we cannot wait because they're in our offices now, but when our new building is up, they're just going to be, you're really going to be able to appreciate them even more. But they're just, again, this is in the Sloss office. Now, to wrap it up, I'm going to go through very quickly some of the other artists. Maybe not. There we go. Okay, another artist that's featured in the exhibit. I cannot wait to really do more research on him. His paintings are amazing. This is Richard Coe. He is a Selma native. He studied in New York. He studied in Boston. He won a scholarship to study in Europe. And then he came to Birmingham during the 30s, during the Great Depression, to serve as the Alabama director for the WP8 art program. And he also painted the Woodlawn mural that a lot of you are familiar with. But again, this is a great diversity to his subject matter. Yet both of these pictures speak to what? It's the Great Depression, speaks to progress. It's a gas station, yeah, but a gas station in the 1930s, and a very fancy one at that, no knocks, 3rd Avenue. And you can also see, though, the old in that. You see the streetcar rails, tracks. But on the right, of course, industry. All speaking to progress during a very difficult time. The next two, we have Sarah Greer, not a lot known about Sarah Greer. She was a native of Denver. She came from Colorado and came to Birmingham in the 20s to open up an art studio. From what I understand, the main reason she developed this fascination with all of the local industry. And the one on my right, this is, a slag tap. And you tap the furnace once every 2 hours to remove the slag. And it was like this great display of fire and iron and slag taps. She was fascinated by them, along with most citizens of Birmingham. They found this fascinating. In one local newspaper, I found this quote stated, "Slag taps at Sloss are as exciting as any fireworks display in the country." It's free too, it's the Depression. Stand on the viaduct. Okay, Carrie Hill. Carrie Hill, very famous, of course, moved from Vance to Birmingham in the late 1800s. She studied art in North Carolina. She went all over Europe, and her works were exhibited in Paris and New York. She was a member of the National Association of Women Painters, and she's going to be the only Alabama woman during the Great Depression to receive WPA painting assignments. Again, industry. This happens to be the Trussville furnace after it's shut down. Now, in closing, what I want to end this with, I'd like to say that, well, these New Deal projects, they not only saved thousands of artists from poverty and from despair, they enabled a lot of Americans. And I remember my grandparents talking about it. The very first time they had access to an original painting, they allowed Americans to attend their first professional live theater or take their first music class, or in this case, it allowed a lot of Southerners to take their first drawing classes by these artists themselves. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy this exhibit.